Boy, look at this lag. Wow.
I think you ought to know about men's radio. The place where men and women really speak. Oh man, what a show. It's men's radio. This crazy show is on 3 times a week. Now Russ and Phil are there to help with all your cares. We laugh, we cry, we talk like grown-ups do. But if you're sad and low, it won't cost you no dough. And radio, that's the place for you. With Russ Kane and Phil Dave.
Oh, he's going again.
I think you ought to know about men's radio.
It's a shut up. Thank you, baked potato. And you can shut up as well.
Are you quite all right there, Russ? do you need to lie down?
I gotta tell you. Do you ever woken up? I don't feel very well today, but it's an extraordinary thing. I thought I'd change computers because I got a slight lag on the other computer.
How did that work for you?
Really, really well. Really well. Couldn't be
it's not like we have a big name guest coming up or anything like that we have to be professional.
Not an important star, one of my heroes coming up, but no, forget it, because he will be very impressed so far with not just my technical know-how, my technical ability, but the way that no one even noticed that it sounded like shit. Hi, everybody. Welcome to The Daily Show. I'm Russ Kane. He's Phil Dave, the king of cravats. Rather disappointing in not wearing a cravat today. And
no, it was a bit hot. Sorry, I took the cravats off. It's not very light. Sorry.
Yeah, I thought. Happy birthday to my beautiful mummy, who is, I think, 96 and still driving her absolutely bloody mad. Right, let's crack on. Well, happy birthday, Julie Voice's mum. Now, I've been a fan of this guy for decades, absolute decades. I've never met him, seen him on the West End several times, read his books, all that sort of stuff. Has Russ been to the charity shop with his old computer? Normally his computer runs okay. I don't know, it's got the buggers today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome author, actor, and general good guy, Mr. Nigel Planer.
Oh my. We are not worthy.
Yeah, we're not worthy, and that's all there is to it. There's nothing more to be said. That's it. We could just have a picture of you, like for the next 30 minutes, and everyone would think that's a great show.
Oh, well, that's good. So I can just push freeze, and I'll go and have a cup of tea.
Actually, do you know what? Speaking of Nigel, you don't have to be polite about this, given what you have been unfortunate enough to witness so far since this show started 3 minutes ago. Yeah. But speaking of a good show, given your levels of expertise and your bank of experience in the industry, what is the key to a good show?
What is the key? I thought you were going to ask about my expertise in computers and change.
No.
Oh God, no! Don't get him started, Nigel. Don't get him started on that, for God's sake.
Myself.
No. But you must. I would like to sort of think that with your wisdom, you have an understanding of what makes good productions these days, and I'm always fascinated.
And going on the strength so far of this show, sort of score it out of 10. Is that what you're saying?
No,
don't give it a rating. Don't give it a rating.
Completely utterly going on what makes a good production. Period. Forget this program.
Yeah, forget this. I mean, this
depends what you're interested in, doesn't it? I mean, I know podcasts are really popular these days, and I've done a few. I've guested on other people's podcasts. I did one of my own as well. But on the whole, unless you have long distance driving, the podcast thing can be a bit dull, isn't it? You're not going to sit down and listen to two celebs nattering about themselves for an hour and a half or whatever. I suppose there's history ones. Those are interesting. Those are good productions.
Yeah. Actually, I think it's interesting though, because podcasts can be oh dear, poor Russ's internet connections are going very well for him today, isn't it?
Last week.
We're only getting half of what Russ is doing.
Poor Russ, dear. You can tell he's having a good day today.
Oh my God's
Russell, go and give it a shake, man. We'll natter. Just go and give it a shake, for goodness sake. We can't hear you.
Well,
Right, anyway.
Switching it off and switching it on.
Absolutely. Okay, well, whilst Russ is hopefully going to get a grip on the internet situation, I suppose that's sort of what I was going to say was the podcast actually, I sort of beg to differ, and I'll tell you for why, is because that we've heard, obviously, you know that the premise of this particular station is very much about mental health and well-being. And what we're very conscious of is how people use the resources and tools around them in this day and age in which we live to try and help them. And it's interesting, the number of people, including our very own Russ, who can actually say that podcasts are quite a good tool to sort of almost bring them down to earth, you know, to soothe.
Yeah.
And I think when you have a particular interest, a fascination in someone's thoughts, life, or what have you, you know, you were saying yourself, you've done a podcast. I wouldn't underestimate the value of that. You know, I think words are very powerful, and especially if someone admires someone.
Yeah, maybe you're right. I remember a few years ago, I used to do a men's mental health spot on Talk Sport Radio. I can't remember the name I did it with. I went along, we got guests in, we interviewed, you know, psychotherapist, a footballer, all sorts of things. It didn't last long, but I managed to clear a spot late night, Talk Sport, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I take your point. I suppose what I mean is it's just listening to the celebs going on.
And I don't think anyone can really benefit from listening to someone who probably doesn't have any words of comfort or wisdom droning on. In fact, if anything, I put it to you that it's distinctly possible it could have the opposite effect to some degree. I don't know about you, but I worry now when I listen to or I watch the fact that there are some people out there who are, should we say, almost famous for the sake of being famous? Is that the most diplomatic way I could put it? I think so. Almost.
You're going to name names now.
Good God, no! I wouldn't be that unprofessional, Gemma Collins. But you know, famous for being famous, who just almost seem to have the most curious effect on society, where people almost become mundane. Is the only way I could describe it? You know, it's almost as if sort of like any concept of thoughts of decent thinking goes almost out the window.
Yeah, I suppose, and a lot of product placement and product selling as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
With your illustrious career, would you say that there are certain types of work that you have discovered are more stressful than others, or is it that sort of whenever you do anything, you put that sort of effort in that it can be, you can feel you're under pressure? Or is there any particular type of performing or work that you do that you'd say sort of gives you more hassle than it's worth?
Well, the work's always, there's different kinds of stresses with each kind of work you're dealing with. But the thing that I think, and I think most actors certainly, and probably writers would agree with me, the thing that is the major stress is what's going on, you know, under the water surface is managing, you know, your time. Will I get this job? When do they want me? Oops, I just went black too. When do they want me? You know, you have to do self-tapes these days. Everybody has to do them. You have to, that's the most stressful thing I have at the moment. You have to do your own thing. You've got to light yourself. You've got to do it. You've got to learn the lines. They sometimes give you 24 hours if you're lucky to learn 3 pages of dialogue. Then you've got to get somebody else who's going to read the lines off. Then you've got to get the eye line right, because the Americans, if you're looking in the wrong eye line, that's it. They won't even look at your tape. So you've got to get the eye line, the thing. Then you've got to switch on your own machine and do all your own tech. Then you've got to learn how to download it, send it to the right people with the right ident. And
of course, meanwhile, it's the added pressure of knowing that ultimately, if you don't get the job you're applying for, potentially it's the difference between actually your income suffering and not, really.
Well, yes, I mean, but that's been going for forever, all my life. Is
but what I suppose what I mean is that sort of with, I suppose what I mean is that with the stress, and I know what you're referring to, because there's a friend of mine who is also an actor, and she's often called, I'm afraid I'm a bit of a geek, if the truth be told. I like technology. I don't know why I do, but I do. And she's called on me a few times to actually help her with these self-tapes that you speak of, because she simply can't get her head around having to do the performance and then to do the uploading as well, you know, to a point where she really does get very stressed about it. So actually, it's interesting you say that, because I just wrongly, you know, forgive me if you are listening, Viv, but I wrongly sort of assumed that it was probably just sort of, by her own admission, technical ineptitude, should we say, that was possibly the reason. But actually thinking about it, it must be very stressful if you're trying to sort of put your effort into the part.
That's the point. If you're trying to remember, count down to record, stop, edit, do all that, you're meant to be thinking yourself into somebody else's shoes, remembering lines and being that person. That's your actual job. And I used to joke with my wife, who actually rather likes reading the lines off. She always is hoping that when they hear her lines off, she'll get the other part. But you know, we always joked it's like maybe an hour, 2 hours preparation and fold down of the tech. Doing the acting, maybe 4 minutes. So the job of the day is several hours of doing somebody else's tech job and doing all that, and lighting and eye lines and everything, and then 4 minutes of doing the job I'm meant to be doing, which is acting the part. So that's the major stress, I think, and I think a lot of actors would agree with me.
And also, it's particularly unfair as well, because, you know, let's not forget that it's not necessarily the line of work that you were looking to enter into whenever you started, one would assume. You know, who would have even thought that this was a thing? Even as recently as pre-pandemic, who would have thought it was a thing that suddenly actors had to have this bank of skills that pertain to really that of an engineer?
Yeah, I think so. Which, even if you had the skills, you might not have them at the same time as you're acting. You know, if I'm not completely computer illiterate, I can do all that. It's just I don't want to do it while I'm pretending to be the Archbishop of Canterbury for an audition. You know what I mean? It's a different. It's your brain can only take. You can't be monitoring yourself at the same time as being something. You know, that's the.
Not to mention, it's not exactly fair to make it. It's not true to life. You know, when you are in that set environment or stage environment or wherever you happen to be performing a particular job, you wouldn't have to focus on those things if you were in that environment. So it doesn't necessarily.
In filming, you're pretty aware of, you know, where's the camera, where's my mark, where am I in focus. You know, if you're sort of fairly experienced, you do have quite a lot of technical knowledge of what's going on, so you are aware of stuff.
Knowledge, yes, but I suppose what I'm trying to get at is the responsibility of someone else to some degree. No,
absolutely. You've got a cameraman, a sound man. If you're doing your own sound recording while you're acting, the brain, well, my brain frazzles.
No, but I think that you really raise a very valid point, and this is precisely sort of one of the premises of this very output, is to actually realize that the stress, the additional stress that we probably all put ourselves upon in this day and age, I believe is actually sort of really rather unhealthy, because even as recently as pre-pandemic, you know, I don't even think I've ever heard of anyone who had to do. Well, not unless it was sort of maybe like could have been exceptionally modern thinking production, but I wouldn't have thought that they had to do many self-shoot auditions, and even sort of now when we think of what working from home. So let's just take the example of someone who has maybe like a 9-to-5 office job. The fact that so much of it can be done from home. Even men's radio before the pandemic, we had a studio. You know, Russ and I would physically go into somewhere and we would speak to a guest in person. Now, the fact that we can do it all through this, what is in essence another sort of version of Zoom, it just goes to show sort of how much the world has changed. And I'm not convinced it's necessarily for the better.
Well, it's like all the new tech. It's got wonderful advantages and wonderful disadvantages as well. You know, things that you know, make it a pain. I think we rely too much now. The memory, I mean, to swiftly turn the conversation towards my book.
Absolutely. Let's please do that.
The memory is we're losing our memory. I used to remember everyone's numbers, my bank numbers and all that. I can still remember my dad's phone number from when I was a kid, but I don't know my son's phone number because I just go, boom, you just go Google it. What's this? Where am I going today? Oh, there. And I used to know my way round London, and now you just click something, it tells you where to go. So we're sort of colonized by the technology, and that's
speaking of colonized by technology. I believe that we have Russell back now. So there you go.
Hello, Russell.
We do. We have me back. Hello there. I was yesterday when I was promoting the fact that you were coming on the show. I had to change computers because the other one I think has just died. And it's like something like this. Sabine Brignall. Nigel, yay! I saw him last at the Richmond Theatre with Aid doing their Vulcan production. It was hilarious, really good. And he said, and she says, I met Nigel at Stage Door. He signed my 12-inch single hole in my shoe. That tell Nigel I'm buying his new poetry book. Are there any signing events in town?
Now, do you know what, Russ? That brings us on beautifully because Nigel and I were saving conversation of new book until you rejoined us. So, take the lead.
Bless you.
There's two new books. That's the only thing. The book that's out at the moment is Jeremiah Born in Time, a time travel adventure comedy story. But the poetry book is out. I'm just looking in my diary now.
Please do.
The poetry book is out on the 18th of September. It's called Making Other Plans. This is the proof copy of it.
Oh, that's gorgeous. Oh, that's really pretty.
Oh,
that's really nice.
That's hypnotic. I love that. Who did that cover?
Yeah, who did the cover?
My stepdaughter.
Wow.
Talk about talent in the family.
It's actually a massive wedding banner that she made for our marriage.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's a sort of
beautiful,
happy marriage banner. So we've shoved it on the front of the book because it's great. It's like it's all made of cloth.
Wow.
And that book's out on the 18th, and just looking at my diary, there is a London date actually, and it's the 25th of September,
right?
At the Pleasance in Islington, and then there's another one for the other book at the Wanstead Tap in Newham, and then we're doing poetry readings myself. I'm going on tour with Henry Normal. The poet, all through the autumn, all around the country. But the Pleasance, there's one in Brighton at the Commedia as well, later in October. Because in the 90s, I went on tour with Henry, and we, as a poet, I was published in anthologies and in the newspapers and things. And we both went in other directions. He went on to produce and write Steve Coogan programs, but he stops doing that now, and he's back as a poet on tour and invited me out, and so we're off again on tour reading our poetry out. And
I'm
also
fascinated
from my novel Jeremiah Born, which is out already.
Available in all good bookshops, I hope.
Yes, and online. If you go online, obviously you can do Amazon, but hive.co.uk, I think, is more satisfactory for the local bookshops.
Oh, that's better then.
Yeah, if you go to hive.co or bookshop.org, they connect up with the bookshops so that we don't, by going online, so we don't kill all the bookshops.
Precisely.
Is it true there's a 20-year hiatus between this, the latest book, Jeremiah Born in Time, and your previous one?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why? How come you waited so long, sir?
20 years, actually. Well, several reasons. I wrote an outline for a third novel, and they didn't like it. so there was that, which was a bit of a problem. But I mean, there were other ideas. But no, basically, I started to work in West End shows, and I figured I won't have time to write a full novel because you have to take some months aside. And I was working 8 shows a week. And so I thought, I'm going to try and write a play. I've been scared of writing plays.
Okay.
Surely a play won't take up a big chunk of time, which worked. I mean, and I've written, so for the last 10 years or so, I've been writing plays. One of which, as you mentioned, I've written with Adrian Edmondson, and is coming out in an updated new version. It's headed straight towards us. And
I love the synopsis, by the way. The synopsis, I thought, oh God, I'd see that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, it's opening at the Park Theatre in September. I'm flinging all these dates out and everything because you write for many years. You're sitting in your study and you're writing and doing all this planning. And then, like the proverbial Messiah, then suddenly all 3 come at once.
Yeah, weird, no? Weird.
Yeah.
Tell us I've got some more stuff I've got to read. Then I want to know the synopsis of the play if you've got time. Steve Andrews, who I used to work with, once had a small part in one episode of a sitcom which featured Nigel and Lisa Goddard, who I've always been a fan of. They were both a delight. And Tony Bramwell, who you will know because he was the man doing most of the PR, etc. for the Beatles, nobody bigger than. I haven't seen him in Totnes recently. He said, absolutely.
I haven't seen Tony Bramwell in Totnes, or I haven't seen me in Totnes.
He says hasn't seen you. He says he hasn't seen you in Totnes recently. And David Mindle, I mentioned just before, he says, please ask him. I hope I'm pronouncing this right, and David Mindle isn't setting me up, which would never surprise me with him, to give Jeep our love. He'll know exactly what you mean, even if you don't.
Yes, I do.
Oh, thank God. Thank God.
Is it radio and on screen friendly, or were you not to know?
I don't know what it is.
My brother's nickname. That's all.
Oh, I see. And this was great. This is from Graham Balfour Lynn, a family of some renown. I was once in a school play with him. One of us went on to an illustrious career on stage and screen. One of us didn't. And Leslie Balfour Lynn. Do you remember Balfour Lynn?
Yeah.
Leslie
no, but the name obviously rings a bell.
Yeah. Leslie Davis, who I'm sure you'll know. I did a modern version of the Marriage of Figaro with him. Apparently you were the gardener and you were brilliant, unquote.
Yes. Yes, we did have on telly, yes.
Yeah.
With a company who were called something like London Music Theatre. Yeah. And it was Tony Britton ran it, and he wrote modern translations of Mozart and Rossini operas with absolutely accessible lyrics. So you'd have the proper singing, and somebody would be saying, "I'll have you, you dirty rotten bastard. I'll have your bollocks. I'll have your bollocks." You know, it was, and they were hilarious. They were appropriate to the story. But
this is BBC Radio 4, right?
I suppose.
No, Julia, it was great fun. Yeah, I only had a small part. I was the gardener.
Yes,
comes in with saying you jumped on my plants, but it's in the opera, that scene, and the tune was exactly right. It's just the words you were singing were different.
Julia McDermott, who's a fellow Soho Whiskey Club member with me and Phil, I'll be listening on catch up. He's an awesome. Loved him as the narrator. We Will Rock You when it was on at the Dominion. So I've never seen.
The thing I was talking about, it was doing We Will Rock You around the time of wanting to do another book, which is 20 years ago. Yeah. And that was 8 shows a week. I did that for 2 years. And you think I'm not going to get a book done, so I'll write a play, which I did. I wrote a play called On the Ceiling, about 2 plasterers on the Sistine Chapel who get fired by Michelangelo, and they sneak back into the chip their bits. Yeah, no, it was all historically very accurate, except for the bit where I had them sneak back in to chip their bits off. because they resented being fired so much. He did have a big staff. He had a big staff of people, and he fired them.
But isn't it wonderful to think that sort of history can be made all the more interesting through the medium of theatrics? You know, I love that. I love the fact that I didn't know that, but instantly now I'm intrigued.
Yes, it's one of my favourite things. I wrote a play about Robert Louis Stevenson and Paul Gauguin, who both died in the South Seas, and they looked very similar. So we had the same actor playing them both. That's called Death of Long Pig. And yes, I'm writing a second play with Adrian at the moment, a bit of a rewrite of the Hannibal story, Hannibal crossing the Alps. So yes, that's it. I love that personally. Making history.
How do you?
Which is
how do you find working? Sorry, I'm so sorry. There's a slight lag. I apologize. How do you find working in collaboration with someone? Do you? Because if you've never tried it, it's very, very difficult. So do you sit in the same room, or do you? I was going to write something with, oddly enough, Julie Birchall, and we were discussing how only a few weeks ago, until we both decided we were too busy to write this musical. But we will write something in the future. But do you sit in the same room and bang ideas around, or do you write like a scene, and then Aid would write a scene, and then you put it together and you edit it? Or
well, you do both of those things. I mean, I've been
Avon.
I don't know if you heard my doorbell go.
I was going to say
Avon lady. The Avon lady.
No,
Tupperware party.
I've written in collaboration almost all my life, and that's what I naturally do. With comedy, it tends to be better. It's only in the last few years, when I wrote my first book, my first novel, that I sort of trained myself to work on my own. And you have to sort of split yourself. I find I have to split myself into two people, one of whom is a sort of crazy do anything, and the other who is the editor, sensible, gonna sort this out. And that's what so I'm still collaborating, but with myself. And with Adrian, we do both of those things you're talking about. I usually go around to his, and you've got one who's typing, one who's not, and you try and make each other laugh, and you put stuff down and you argue it out. And then maybe there's a week we can't get to see each other. He'll be tinkering with it, writing a scene, sending it to me. I'll write in a scene that doesn't appear to fit with what we've done, but there's something in it worth feeding into it. And then we get back together, we do another draft. So that's the fun thing, I think. Collaboration, if it's with the right person, is more fun than sitting on your own, because you can get a bit stir crazy. You go a bit crazy.
Lonely. It's lonely. I'm writing second novel now, and it's a lonely business, and that's all there is to it. I remember, Nigel, listening to various documentaries on the Pythons, and how it would get quite heated in the room when one said, and they were split into different camps, very much so. How one would say, I think this is really funny, and Cleese or somebody else would say, no, I don't think it's funny at all. Do you ever have that with collaboration? How do you decide finally? Do you toss a coin?
Usually there's a sort of stronger personality. Somebody usually pushes their way through. I think in Python's case, Eric Idle had trouble because the others were double acts. So they had an ally. There were two of them. So there was Michael Palin and Terry Jones, and Graham Chapman and John Cleese, who had worked together as double acts. So he always felt he only had the one vote.
Never thought of that.
To vote, which I think can happen. With the comic strip and the Young Ones guys, it helps if there's sort of allocated roles. I think, somebody's like team leader on something, because then somebody's got to do it, you know.
And someone has to make it. Somebody has to make a decision. Otherwise, you're just be calm, aren't you? You won't make any move.
Yeah.
It's interesting you said about comic strip. Because I'm a lot older than Phil. Phil wasn't born at this point. Literally wasn't born, but many, many, many years ago, Nigel, my pal, I think it was my pal Lloyd, said, "Hey, there's a charity do on some theatre. Why don't we go?" So we rocked up. Didn't know any of the acts. And sat there. It was packed. There was a terrible female comedy act. I don't know if you ever heard of them, called Saunders. Just at the time, I sat there thinking, holy God, please tell me you've got another career lined up, because they were really not very funny. And then
it shows how much you know about comedy.
But yeah, I know. There you go. No, but it was interesting because some of the stuff was funny, and some of the stuff they were doing proper stand-up, and it just died on its arse. And then, and I've never forgotten it, how people like yourself can be so fascinating with communication. A guy walks on the stage. Now remember, this is a charity. This is 1980 something or other. And he walks on the stage and goes, "My name's Rick, right? And I'm an angry poet." So we all sat there in complete silence, thinking, oh, he's an actual poet. And he starts to do this poetry. And everyone's sitting there with due deference because it's a charity evening and they've obviously brought a poem along. And it was only when the first person laughed in the stalls that the rest of the auditorium had permission to laugh. Of course, it was the wonderful Rick Mail, who no one at that point had really seen en masse, because he was still doing the Dangerous Brothers. It was an amazing moment.
Tricking the audience. I did a similar thing with Neil, which is to go on and be a bad folk singer and pretend initially that I really was that, and that it wasn't meant to be funny. And that was our game, what we did in those days. Yeah.
It was. I've never forgotten that evening, because the Dangerous Brothers, just, they were cracking me up. I mean, it was fantastic stuff. How do you feel about what was then very sort of left field? I don't mean politically left. I mean, quite obscure, and then becoming literally the nation's sweethearts, the national treasures. It's quite an arc, isn't it?
Yeah, and it happened quite quickly, I think, especially for French and Saunders.
Absolutely.
Alexis Sale, even. If you think
he
about
was on the bill.
These are establishment figures now. Alexis still got series on Radio 4. French and Saunders sort of became the alternative to Ronnie's and became mainstream. And it all happened quite quickly, within a couple of years, really, in the early 80s. And I don't know how to equate that. It was meant to be alternative.
That's the thing, isn't it?
Mainstream. Yeah.
Now look, Nigel, I'm very aware of the time, sir. We were told right at the start of this, we have you for half an hour, and we've probably kept you longer already. So just before we do sort of allow you to carry on your business, please do remind the 2 books that people need to look out for at the moment, and also where they need to be going.
Where they need to be going, I'd have to get my diary out and go. The book. Where's that copy of it? Here we go. The book that is actually out is Jeremiah Born in Time.
Look at that.
Oh, another.
Oh, let's full screen you. Hang on 2 seconds.
Thank you very much.
Oh, look at that.
With some quotes.
I love that.
Anthony Head, Ben Elton, Miriam Margolis.
Yeah.
How lovely.
It's the first in a trilogy of time travel stories. It's quite an unusual take on time travel. It's about morphic resonance and inherited memory. So it travels back. Yes, exactly.
Right. Might need a tad explaining.
Okay.
If you've got time.
Did you see the video of the beaver recently on Twitter? There was one going around. A beaver hasn't been brought up near other beavers, never seen a river, never seen a tree, been brought up in a flat, and the first thing it does when it can walk is build a dam out of all the teddies and the saucers, and it knows how to build a dam.
Wow.
So same as birds know how to fly south, know how to build a nest. And morphic resonance is trying to describe what that process is. Why do we have this inherent memory? And assuming we also have it, we can inherit memories. Why do we inherit gestures? Why do I do this same thing with my hand, this thing, that my dad used to do? Did I watch him, or was I born with it? And so I've
been asking for years why I've got the same hairline as my father. I hear you, believe me. So it's the phrase to sort of describe this is morphic resonance. And Jeremiah Bourne finds himself transported in time back into 1910, and he doesn't understand why. His mum has disappeared. She was a London taxi driver, and the book's set in 2019, just before the pandemic, in the same place in London. So when he travels in time, he doesn't travel. It's not space-time continuum. He doesn't travel in space. He travels only in time. So he is exactly in the same place, in the same room, in his house. He goes back to 1910, and there are people from 2123 who are aware of what he's up to, who are trying to stop him, basically. And their method of time travel is an extension of that morphic resonance idea. So in the future, there's memory is become a very important thing, because there's been some digital meltdowns, like we were talking about earlier. I imagined a future, instead of it all being space age, I imagine a future where we've lost all our data, but like all of our data. Imagine if that happened. What you could remember would become rather important, wouldn't it? People who could remember stuff, such as, say, a London taxi driver who knows their way around London. But imagine if there was no sat-navs, nothing. It's all gone. And you couldn't even brush your teeth, could you? Some people have a mobile phone to work out what setting to put their toothbrush on. We'd be stuck. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, Nigel, with some people, I'm not convinced they know how to brush the teeth now. But yes, absolutely.
Oh, you've been on the tube recently.
They need a mobile device to tell them, brush your teeth now.
For 3 minutes.
So that's Jeremiah Bourne in Time. Love that. And the book of poetry was, remind us again, sorry?
It's called Making Other Plans.
Love it.
Beautiful.
And it's beautiful. Making other plans, as in life is what happens when you're making other plans, as in the John Lennon lyric. And poetry also happens when you're making other plans. It's a sort of memoir that goes back it's the last, because I put it backwards, a backwards memoir. So the last poem was written in 1970. So it's my whole life in poetry.
Wow.
Yeah. Some of them are funny. Because we performed them. Myself and Henry performed them. Some of them less funny. Some patches when I wasn't writing so much poetry. Some it's all very crowded with lots of poetry. It's like a sort of backwards memoir.
What a fabulous thing to do.
Love it.
Beautiful thing to do. God damn.
Thank you. It's been such a treat to meet you.
It's been an absolute treat. It really has. Pleasure. Absolute pleasure. It's been lovely.
You must know this, but strange that men's radio station spells Mrs.
Precisely.
We are
aware of that.
We've always said that the slogan of the station should be, behind every strong man is a good woman.
I always thought it's behind every successful man is an astonished woman who goes. Nigel, good luck with everything you're doing.
Nigel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Well.
Bye-bye.
Wow.
Wow.
We could just to clarify, we sort of said before at the start of the show, before we went live, how long have we got you for, sir? And he said, we could do about half an hour. 40 minutes later, he's still very kindly chatting to us. So that's amazing.
Charming man. I'll be absolutely honest. There's very few people that I've always wanted to meet, because they always say never meet your heroes. And I've always wanted to meet Nigel Planer. Just have a lot of people.
I know, and you spent the first 10 minutes faffing about with a laptop.
I know. You know how angry that made me. I really had to dig. Thank God for mental health training. I tell you what, Phil, because I lost it, and I've had to change computers, and then this. I don't know what the heck it is.
Well, at least you came back, so that's the main thing.
We came back. It's really interesting. I've got to tell you, I get offered a lot of people to come on the show. And I was offered somebody. I'm going to not say who it is. And the PR company said, "Oh, do you want so?" Yeah, I won't. I said, "Do you want so and so?" I said, "No." They were really surprised. It's a big name. They said, "Why, Russ? Why don't you want them on the show?" And I said, "I'll tell you why I don't want them on the show. I've only stopped since 1984 2 interviews. One Phil was in the studio with me. The guy was,
and it wasn't with me. It wasn't my fault.
No. The guy arrived. He was completely out of control. He wouldn't even sit down. The PR woman couldn't control it, and we had to end the interview and get him out of the studio. I don't know what the hell the matter was. Anyway, and
he's very unpleasant to deal with.
It was very unpleasant. It was a horrible, nasty guy, and came in to talk about one thing which was pleasant and charming, and just. The moment he walked in, became a monster, so we got rid of him. And the other one was on when I was on Capital. I remember I've been doing this since 1984. They were so rude that I stopped the interview because the person said, "You're not enjoying this, are you?" So I said, "No, I'm not. Bye." And it was the same person.
Brilliant.
I wouldn't dare say who it is. But I didn't want them back on men's radio station.
God, what a spoil sport. It could have been a rematch. It could have been Mark II.
I'd have to bring it up. I'd have to bring. Do you remember, you unpleasant person? I got to ask you a question. Can I ask you a question?
You can. I can't guarantee I've got an answer up my sleeve, but I'll give it a damn good try.
I know that. I want to ask you a question. I brought it up with Neil Long on Wednesday.
Oh.
I'd love your take on it. Because I value your opinion, as you know. On Monday, I went to see a show. It wasn't my cup of tea, but it'll do very well. It's going up to Blackpool. It'll do very well. I personally don't think it's a London show, but there was tons of energy. And when I say it just wasn't my cup of tea, it wasn't my cup of tea, but the audience liked it a lot. And I hadn't read the program, and it'll be a success, by the way. I'm not knocking it at all. And there was a lot of talent up on the stage. And it's been co-directed by, well, I won't spoil the surprise, by somebody that I hadn't realized. And then, because it's the opening night, the actors gave a little speech. And they said, "And I want to introduce you now to someone who's become like a second father to me, like his first father isn't famous enough. And ladies and gentlemen, Michael Barrymore." And
wow.
Yes, I thought I'd get that reaction. And coming through the auditorium was Michael Barrymore. And Michael Barrymore got up on stage and made, well, I'm always worried because they're actors, aren't they? But
did he say all the way at the back?
All at the back? What fun? No, it was a totally different guy. It was a totally different guy. Very humble, very faltering, very uncomfortable. And I asked Neil, I want to ask you the same thing. The audience loved him. The audience went wild. Because it's a big moment. It could have gone either way, although I think the British are very forgiving. And the audience went absolutely wild, gave him, people yelling out, "We love you, Michael," and all this sort of stuff. And it was a packed house. When does redemption come in? It's kind of my question, Phil. I know it's a bit heavy, but how did you, because I mentioned Michael Barrymore to somebody else, a friend of mine. They pulled a face and didn't want to hear too much more about it. And I was thinking, are we entitled to give people redemption? Or I don't know. I found it a little confusing. I'll be honest with you. I found it a bit confusing.
Or I'd say, for me personally, I reckon that if one looks as forgiveness as cathartic, then actually I believe that it's essential, because otherwise all that happens is that you build up horrible emotions within, don't you? So if it's something that could benefit you for forgiving someone, then that's fine. If it's something that would upset you more by forgiving them, then I'd say, why should you? Now, I am, as you know, a follower of religion, and religion does certainly Christianity teaches. I mean, I don't follow Christianity personally, but Christianity certainly teaches
that turn the other cheek,
that forgiveness is essential.
Yes.
And I suppose it depends on how much one believes in that. So for me, I'm a great believer that people, if they truly realize the error of their ways, deserve a second chance, but don't necessarily forget that something's happened. Don't just automatically assume that a person is capable of just like that, not capable of acting a certain way again.
Well, they're actors, of course. This is the point.
Yeah, but with someone like if we're talking about someone like Michael Barrymore in particular, right?
I'm hoping to get him on the show, by the way.
Let me be very clear. I actually don't think he had anything to be sorry about that I saw personally.
Somebody died.
I know they did. No, I know. I remember it perfectly clearly what happened
20 years ago.
But if I'm not very much mistaken, Michael Barrymore was never found to be implicated to have anything to do with Stuart Lubbock's death.
No, there was no. He's never been charged with anything.
Exactly. So for the way I look at it is, let's try and reverse the situation. If heaven forbid a million times that you decided to host a party and someone died whilst you were whilst hosting that party, let's just say hypothetically, and you would never ever charged with anything, never implicated as having had anything to do with it. Would you want your name and your reputation to be tarnished for life? If something was nothing to do with you, it just happened to be.
That's my question. See,
and
absolutely.
I personally think that if there is nothing that he's guilty of, he has been treated hideously unfairly for it.
I'll tell you why I wanted to discuss this. It spun off in two directions. I follow Michael Barrymore on Twitter, and he went mad because this is the media in a nutshell. This was the media encapsulated. They went to report on the opening night of the play. That was it. What did they do? Dragged the whole story from 20 years ago into the story of he co-directing this new production. And I thought, really, and Michael Barrymore went berserk on Twitter. He was absolutely furious. He says, why? I don't want everybody in the play dragged it. He was a very talented man. At points, I thought he was touched with genius, to be honest with you. I thought he was an incredibly talented and very talented man. I've never met him.
An extraordinary performer, absolutely extraordinary performer. I mean, the way that he could get an audience attention like that in the palm of his hand, incredible.
He had it. Here's an interesting. Then part B, is it really, because we're all rocking and reeling from first Philip Schofield, whose opinion, I've completely done a 180 on that. I've never met the man. I know that. I have no skin in the game, but I think what's happened is out of balance, put it that way. Then Hugh Edwards, and I was thinking, that was 20 years ago, and that was kind of the precursor to this. Now, I'm going to be very, very careful because they're highly litigious. But Graham Packer said, would you go to a play starring Kevin Spacey? No, I wouldn't. But that's my decision. There was a trial. He was found not guilty on everything. That's all one can say. That's all one can say about it without stretching into slander and libel. Leave it at that. Would I personally go to see him in a play? No, I wouldn't. But when they say, he broke down and cried, yeah, I get that. But they're actors. I'm sure he was very emotional. But they, people who are great actors, like Kevin Spacey is a phenomenal actor. He's one of the greatest actors. You can turn anything on. I'm not saying he did. But there is the capacity. I can't do it. Phil can't do it. You can't cry and laugh to order. But great actors totally can. That's all.
Look, I can see he's got the police onto you already. Let me be very clear. I think where we go horribly wrong, and it's funny, actually, this came up in conversation the other evening, totally and utterly not knowing that we were going to talk about it today. I think where we go terribly wrong is this notion of trial by media.
Oh, well.
I absolutely hate the way that in this day and age, we're so obsessed with someone who has been accused of something, not necessarily found guilty of something, accused of something, and we have to know who it is. Why do we have to know who it is? You know, that potentially could ruin that person's life. And if they're found not guilty, they're still tarnished. How does that make sense? How is that fair? Because otherwise there's no course of justice. What's the point of finding someone not guilty if they're just going to be tarnished for the rest of the days anyway?
Well, we have entered the world of trial by social media and trial by the tabloids. That's how it is. That is the world in which we live. Philip Schofield would be very lucky to ever come back. And yet when you look at, there's so much more to come out. There's so much more. Nothing's come out. As I said, I don't know the man, but nothing's come out. There was no further allegations. Nothing. Now, I understand they've got a problem with Hugh Edwards. I understand that people might, you can read the news. You cannot be the news. I get that. I think he will come back in lots of other roles, making documentaries and stuff like that. I think his career is very far from over.
So what it boils down to me, I think anyways, it should be dependent purely if an individual, regardless of the name, if an individual is found guilty, that's when society should start, sorry, using the S word again, that's when they should be treated differently.
But here's a great, this is really, I'd never thought of this from Graham Pack. I'm going to read it out in case you're just listening to this and not watching it. It says this: Leslie Grantham, who played Dirty Den in EastEnders, was found guilty of murder. Yes, he was. He was in Germany, involving with a cab driver, etc. Found guilty of murder and imprisoned. If that was now, would he have appeared in EastEnders or any acting role? I wrote for Leslie Grantham, oddly enough, for corporate media. He was perfectly nice. But so saying. How do we answer that in 2023? How do we answer that? You're so correct, Phil, says Rosemary Jessup. I hate the speculation and assumptions on social media. They are appalling.
Can I put it, all right, this is how screwed up the world has become and how it really does bother me terribly. Okay. Yeah. I'll just give you as an example. Sure. And I recognize that you're going to say, well, this is one trivial extreme to quite a serious extreme. So bear with me. Okay. If you've got someone such as Philip Schofield, right, using as an example, who I personally happen to not like his on-air style. That's just my humble opinion. You know what? He's not for everyone. He's not for me. However, what he did, you could argue very easily, was immoral, right? But that's it. That's all you can argue. Because he's not been prosecuted as having done anything illegal.
Correct.
Now, if he's not done anything illegal, he's technically a law-abiding citizen.
Correct.
Okay. Now let's have a look at, say, the Just Stop Oil Brigade. These people are deliberate nuisances who are causing mayhem and obstruction to the peace and just a public nuisance. Okay. Yes, and in my mind's eye, that is an offense. They might not have been prosecuted, but that is blatantly breaking the law and they should be trialed accordingly, I believe. And yet we seem to live in this world now where those who are innocent are persecuted, lambasted, and lose their livelihood and their career. Those who are blatantly guilty are almost idolized and worshipped. What the hell is going on?
I say one thing to you. The Rotherham mass groomings. Why was nothing done? Well, you know the answer to why nothing was done. You know why. And it's the same with Just Stop Oil. Why is nothing being done properly? You know why. There's always an agenda, a subtext to what this happens. I think there should just be what would happen? I'm going to drive across Tower Bridge and decide, doesn't matter what course, I'm just going to stop my car. What would happen to me? What would happen to me? I stray into a bus lane for 10 feet. The world ends. the letters start. I mean, you've straight
fined.
And even when people have pulled over to let an ambulance go past, but it's got the blues and twos on, or a police car go past, or a fire engine, and they argue, I had to pull over, there was an ambulance needed to get through, they still get fined. No, this is the world in which we live. This is the world in which we live. It makes absolutely no sense.
So those who are law-abiding get persecuted. Those who are blatantly mischief makers and guilty seemingly get off scot-free.
Well, I'm going to pull you up on one thing of the word mischief is kind of Enid Blyton-y, isn't it? It's kind of friendly. He's mischievous. He's a bit of a lad. Some prat sitting in the middle of the road, stopping. And of course, they're doing the exact opposite. They're increasing pollution because vehicles are stationary at the very least. How dare they?
Yeah, but look, I mean, I was using Just Stop Oil as an example.
Well,
I don't really want to give those morons any more airtime than they've already got. But what I'm trying to get at is that you've got troublemakers versus those who, okay, might have got themselves into a bit of a pickle, but unless they're actually criminally prosecuted, and I know people are going to turn around and say, well, hang on a second, eco-protesters haven't necessarily been criminally prosecuted, but there is a difference, I think, between someone who is blatantly breaking the law and someone who maybe goes down a wrong path and is not found guilty of something. Well, if they've actually gone through a trial, if they've actually gone through a criminal trial and been found not guilty, why should their lives be ruined?
That should be the end. Well, that has to be the end of it. That has to be the end of it, which is why I'm very, very careful with the Kevin Spacey thing. He was found not guilty on all charges. That's the end of it. I can't comment now. I have a personal opinion. I can't comment. Neither will I. Graham Pack says this. You try and stop these, well, he's called them something. Let's just say stop the oil people. You try to move these people from the road and you get done for assault. Enough's enough. My fear has always been, if the police don't act and nature abhors a vacuum, you will get vigilantes.
Try telling Dyson that. Just saying. Anyway.
What I'm saying is, it's completely snapped. Why did some people get out of jail free? I don't understand why it is that anyone thinks they have the right to look down on someone who, if nothing else, has actually got quite a lot of success behind them, right? If nothing else, and decide that they are somehow morally better than them, because we've all done it. It's the British disease. It's the British disease. Build them up only to break them down. Yeah, Lee Durnford, who's an extremely nice and very clever and has a huge job, and he knows about these things, make obstruction an arrestable offence. It's quite simple. Jeez, he says.
But Lee, is it? Because you could argue a broken down vehicle is an obstruction. Do you arrest the driver of a broken down vehicle?
In the law, it's intent. It's intent. My lorry's broken down. I've got to get to Huddersfield by 3:00 in the afternoon to deliver fresh cakes. It's not my intent to break down on the old Kent Road. Deliberately stopping my lorry and standing there. That's intentional. Quite different. It's all about intent, Phil.
That's me told.
Phil, that Dyson joke sucked.
Thank you, Paul Claridge. Dear.
Oh dear God. It's very interesting. The other thing I wanted to ask Nigel Planer about, by the way, just as we wind up.
Oh, he left about 20 minutes ago.
Oh, did he? I didn't notice. Obviously he did. I always believe, and I know you believe too, because you were irate and I was irate, but you even more than me during pandemic when they said to all the people in the arts, I don't mean painters and decorators, the arts, I'll go and retrain as something else. And they'll go, what the hell? How art in all its forms is so good for mental health. It truly is. And I'm not shoehorning it in. Phil and I talk about this a lot off there. It's true because it makes people feel better. It makes people feel better. And I'm fascinated that people want to go to poetry readings. I think that's amazing and beautiful. I'm not keen on poetry. I'm just me. I'm not keen on it. But the fact that there are poetry readings kind of gives hope, doesn't it? It's not all Love Island. Kind of where I'm at. And on that bombshell.
And on that note, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, I'll be back on Monday.
The marvelous Nigel Planer.
Yeah.
Yes, feel better, Russell.
Thank you very much. Okay, until Monday, take care. Thank you, Mr. Phil Dave. Bye, gang.